Hello everybody, so this is my third lecture. Today I'm going to talk about how to use translanguaging pedagogy. So I'll go through why we need to teach CLIL through a multilingual lens, that is, it's not monolingual. Even though we want our students to learn English, there are lots and lots of multilingual resources that we need to draw on to help them to learn the English language. Then I'll talk about how to use similar genres across the students' first language and second language, like the Chinese and English similar genres in both of the L1 and L2. And then what is translanguaging and how we can leverage on translanguaging pedagogy. And then I'll give a brief introduction to the MEC, explain what it is. Okay, so you ready? First of all, why do we need to teach CLIL through a multilingual lens? Jim Cummins, very well-respected professor in Canada. He was also my professor. He's just retired a couple of years ago, and he's been working in bilingual education for many, many years, well respected. This is what he said in the TESOL conference in his keynote speech. We should teach through a multilingual lens in such a way that students are enabled to use the language talents for powerful and identity-affirming purposes. So the main purpose of our teaching as teachers is to scaffold meaning and to activate students' background knowledge, and then to build on students' background knowledge and extend their knowledge through explicit guidance and instruction. If you remember, CLIL is different from just language teaching because it's driven by meaning, by content. That is, language learning is carried out through communicating interesting content meaning. So the language learning is driven by content learning, so that's why we call it CLIL. Jim Cummins' idea is, in order to get students to be interested and excited about learning language, we need to scaffold their meaningful comprehension. We also need to reinforce the kind of academic language they learn across the curriculum. So they might be learning similar academic genres, text types, in their Chinese curriculum, and we can leverage on it to help students to transfer their knowledge in their Chinese genres into their English genres. And then we can maximize their literacy, their reading and writing engagement. And most of all, we connect to students' lives. That is, we can leverage on their familiar knowledge mediated through their familiar L1. And in the process, we also acknowledge students' bilingual identity. That is, they're both Chinese speakers and English speakers. They are multilinguals. They're bilinguals, they're multilinguals. So this is a simple diagram. Literacy, meaning how we can help students to achieve biliteracy. There's Chinese literacy, English literacy, and we scaffold meaning, we connect to students' familiar knowledge and familiar everyday life, and we affirm students' bilingual identities. That is, it's not just monolingual, but bilingual and multilingual identities. And that way, we expand and extend their language competencies. Now, in the past two lectures with me, you have already learned about genre and register theory. So this is just a very quick revision. So register, we have field, tenor, mode, the three factors shaping students' choices of the appropriate suitable vocabulary and suitable sentence grammatical patterns for the specific content area, for the specific content meanings. And genres, we go through a sequence of stages to achieve our overall communicative purpose, whether you are to inform, to persuade, to describe, to give instructions or advice. So genre and register theories are very useful to integrate content with language learning. So again, we have gone through these in the past two lectures. Just to say, genre gives us the overall communicative purpose and help us to organize our different paragraphs, different sentences into through a step of stages, a sequence of stages into a coherent text，就是这个文章的organization，就是这个text organization, this is genre stages. And then register helps us to select the appropriate vocabulary, appropriate sentence patterns to express our content meanings in a specific discipline or specific content areas. So the genre egg, again, this is the genre egg I've been talking about. That is, language is not the same. Like we use different genres, different registers for different purposes in different content domains, in different areas of content meanings. So now, in our globalized world, you can see that the genres in our first language actually can be transferred. Our knowledge of the genre knowledge can be transferred to our L2. So if you are writing an argumentative essay, the stages you go through to write a Chinese argumentative essay is similar to the stages you go through to write an English argumentative essay. So that's where we can leverage on students' genre knowledge in the L1 familiar L1 to their less familiar L2. So now this topic is really related to the recent movement called translanguaging and translanguaging pedagogy. It's also to say we need to draw on students' multilingual, bilingual resources when they're doing their learning in CLIL. The term was first coined by Ken Williams to refer to the work of teachers in bilingual education in Wales, in the UK. There is a typo here. The Wales is WALES in the UK. The pedagogical practice of Welsh and English bilingual education classrooms, where these students, they are learning their Welsh heritage language through a bilingual education program. It's like the Taiwanese students learning English through a bilingual education program, which we call CLIL. CLIL is an example of bilingual education. It's a specific program model and approach for bilingual education. So students, like they can read some Welsh passages and then they write some English passages or vice versa. So they can alternate languages. They can read multiple texts, bilingual texts, and write bilingual texts. So translanguaging are multiple discursive practices in which bilinguals engage in order to make sense of their bilingual worlds. So like your students, our students in the Taiwan context, they're immersed in Chinese. So you can't say, okay, switch off your Chinese, just use English. Now, sometimes we need to do that, but sometimes, especially in CLIL, we want to activate their familiar knowledge that is mediated in their familiar language, Chinese. So um, language relationships are dynamic. The semiotic resources, semiotic is just a term to say meaning making. We need to have meaning making resources, right? In their in the bilinguals communicative toolkit, like a toolbox. So it is an integrated toolbox. We don't have two separate toolbox. One is called Chinese communicative repertoire. One is called English communicative repertoire. It is an integrated. We have a holistic linguistic toolbox in our mind, in our brain, and we cannot compartmentalize them. We can if we force our students to do that, but that way we don't leverage on, we don't capitalize on students' familiar resources as a bridge to learn unfamiliar resources. So, and also students come into the classroom with a history, their personal history. We cannot just ask them to forget their personal history once they enter into your classroom, your language classroom. So we have to capitalize on their personal history, their background knowledge, and their background familiar language resources, be it in Chinese or in English. We just capitalize on them. We just leverage on them. We draw on all of their meaning making resources, semiotic or meaning making resources. So there are two kinds of translanguaging practices. One is called spontaneous, one is called planned translanguaging. So spontaneous translanguaging takes place spontaneously. So just now I have translanguaged a little bit when I say genre. Genre is in Chinese what's called yuti. That is trying to draw on your familiar linguistic knowledge, because a genre in English might be, oh, it's a new term. What is it? Okay, it is a text type. And then what is it? Then I can activate your background knowledge. Actually, in Chinese, you already have this concept，就是这个文家的语体，就是你有这个议论文，一个描写文。So you have description text type, you have argumentative text type, right? So I translanguage to leverage on your familiar knowledge in Chinese to explain the unfamiliar term genre or text type to you, right? So that's an example. So I can also design my PowerPoint in a way that I build in translanguaging, that is to leverage on your L1 knowledge, like the bilingual notes approach that I will show you later on today. And I will also like to briefly introduce to you this concept of MEC, Multimodalities and Textualization Cycle. This is a tool to plan a unit of work in CLIL. In the next lecture and my final lecture, I will use examples to illustrate how you can use this cycle, this ME cycle, to plan, to do your lesson planning in CLIL. Briefly, in the first stage of this cycle, you create lots of interesting experiences on the topic. If you are teaching on a content topic, you use videos, you use diagrams, you use role play, all kinds of, we call these multimodalities. That is not just language. Language is the linguistic mode. You can have visual mode, you can have gesture mode, you can have multimedia mode. So in the first stage, we activate students' background knowledge and interest in the content topic. In the next lecture, we will talk about an example of a balanced diet, how to eat, how to have a balanced diet, a healthy diet. So if that's the content topic, then we use all kinds of modalities, videos, visuals, diagrams, role plays for the first lesson or the first stage in your lesson, depending on how long your lesson is. And then in the second stage, once students got excited about the topic, we engage them in reading and taking notes from all kinds of texts. First from their familiar text, like the Chinese text on the topic, then less familiar text, English text, the parallel, similar text on the same topic, and they take notes. So that is like the bilingual notes approach, which is to scaffold students. If you just give them monolingual English text on the food pyramid, for example, then it might be a little bit scary to them. So if you have a bilingual text approach to scaffold their reading of English and their note making, then that helps them to find reading not so difficult, not so challenging. Then the first stage, we engage students to transform what they have learned from the reading and their reading notes into a final product, which can be an oral presentation, which can be a written summary of what they have learned in a similar on a similar topic that they have just read about. So in the next lecture, I will give you very good examples to illustrate how to use the MEC to plan a unit of work in CLIL. You can do lesson planning in CLIL that can take care of students' interest level, take care of students' language learning and content learning, to integrate language learning into meaningful, interesting content learning. So this is what I said today. I want to review. That is, today I talk about using multilingual lenses, drawing on students' multilingual resources, and also translanguaging, which just means we let students spontaneously use their familiar language as long as they're on task, and also a planned translanguaging pedagogy like the bilingual notes approach and also like this MEC approach, which I will elaborate in the final lecture, the next lecture. So there are some examples and discussion activities that your workshop mentor will do with you, will guide you through. And you're welcome to email me. My email is on my PowerPoint slide. Thank you and goodbye for now. 再见. Bye bye.